Right now, somewhere in the United States, a hotel camera is recording footage that has a 72-hour deletion window. No law requires them to keep it longer. Tonight, we go further than anyone has gone with this case. We go to the building itself, its history, before Elisa Lam ever checked in. The people who were there the same night. The details in the coroner's report that most media coverage skipped entirely, and what that building looks like today. The Cecil Hotel opened in 1927 on South Main Street in downtown Los Angeles. It was designed for long-term residential guests and traveling businessmen. 600 rooms, 19 floors, one of the largest hotels in the city at the time of its construction. Within 3 decades of opening, it had become something else entirely. I want to be precise here, because this is where coverage of this case often becomes imprecise. What I am about to walk you through is not legend. It is not internet mythology. Every event I am describing is in the documented public record. In 1931, just 4 years after the hotel opened, a man named W.K. Norton was found dead in his room. He had ingested poison. The case was documented by the Los Angeles Police Department. In 1934, a woman named Pearson fell from a window on an upper floor. The coroner ruled it a fall. Whether it was intentional was never established, to everyone's satisfaction. These were not isolated incidents in the hotel's early decades. They were part of a pattern of documented events that caused the Cecil Hotel to become known within law enforcement circles in Los Angeles as a location with an unusually high frequency of incident reports relative to comparable properties. By the 1980s, the neighborhood around the hotel had become one of the highest crime corridors in the city. The hotel itself had transitioned from a residential hotel to a facility serving very low-income tenants, many dealing with chronic housing instability. The Los Angeles Times and other regional outlets documented the area's conditions during this period. The hotel appears in multiple public records from this era. Now, here is the detail that most coverage of the Elisa Lam case omits entirely. Elisa Lam did not choose the Cecil Hotel randomly. She booked a bed in the hotel's budget section, which at the time was operating under a separate name to attract backpacker travelers unfamiliar with the property's documented history. This is documented in travel booking records and confirmed in subsequent reporting. A 21-year-old student, traveling alone, booked what appeared to be an affordable downtown option. The branding, some journalists have noted in the public record, obscured the connection to the building's history. She did not know what she was walking into, and that raises a structural question that has never been answered in policy. Should a lodging facility with that documented history be permitted to market itself under a separate brand name to travelers who have no way of accessing that history without significant prior research? That question is not answered by California law. It is not answered by federal lodging regulations. And it was not answered by the investigation that followed. In January and February of 2013, the Cecil Hotel was not empty. This seems obvious, but the way the case is usually covered, it can feel as though Elisa Lam was the only person in the building. She was not. The hotel had long-term residents. It had short-term travelers. It had staff who worked overnight shifts and morning shifts and maintenance windows. Most of these people were never publicly identified in the investigation's official outputs. That is partly a function of privacy law and partly a function of how the investigation was structured. But one person who was in that building during the relevant period is in the public record. And the way that person's presence in the building has been discussed and then not discussed and then discussed again is itself a document of how information moves around a case like this. His name is Morbid, a musician who performed under that stage name and who was, according to publicly documented booking records and his own subsequent public statements, staying at the Cecil Hotel at the same time as Elisa Lam. I want to be very clear about what I am and am not saying here. He was investigated by the Los Angeles Police Department and was cleared. He has denied any involvement in Elisa Lam's death on the public record. I am not suggesting otherwise. What I am pointing to is this. In the weeks and months after Elisa Lam's body was found, the online communities that were obsessively analyzing her case identified this musician's presence in the building and began attributing significance to it based primarily on aesthetic associations with his stage name and musical content. He was cleared, but his name circulated. His bookings were published without his consent. His social media was archived and analyzed by strangers. This is what happens when a high-profile case combines with a low accountability information environment. That is not a mystery to be solved. That is a harm that was done. And it points to something structural about how cases like this get processed in the internet era. The investigation had one standard of evidence. The internet had a different one. And the person caught between them had no recourse. Before we continue, has the way online communities have handled cases like this ever concerned you? Have you ever seen someone named, investigated by the internet, and then quietly cleared with no equivalent attention? Drop your thoughts in the comments. On June 21st, 2013, the Los Angeles County Department of Medical Examiner coroner released the official findings on Elisa Lam's cause of death. The cause of death was listed as accidental drowning. The manner of death was listed as accident. That is what was reported. Widely. Definitively. Here is what was reported. Less widely. The toxicology portion of the report noted the presence of several medications in Elisa Lam's system at the time of her death. She had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and was prescribed multiple medications to manage the condition. This was known. Her family had spoken about it publicly, and it was reported as context for some of the behavioral observations in the elevator footage. What was reported less thoroughly was this. Independent analyses of the publicly released coroner's report conducted by legal journalists and forensic commentators on the public record have noted that the report's toxicological findings included medications at levels that some forensic pharmacology experts, writing in their professional capacity, described as consistent with possible non-compliance with prescribed dosage. Now, I want to be careful here because this is an area where responsible coverage requires precision. The coroner's report did not indicate that medication levels contributed to her death. The official finding remains accidental drowning. What the medication information does raise is a different question. A young woman traveling alone, managing a significant mental health condition, was staying in a facility with documented structural deficiencies in its security infrastructure. Did the facility know? Did they have any obligation to know? Does the law require hotels to have any protocol for guests who may be experiencing a medical episode that affects their safety? In most U.S. states, the answer to the last question is not specifically. Now let me talk about the water tank. On February 19, 2013, 19 days after Elisa Lam was reported missing, a maintenance worker climbed to the Cecil Hotel's rooftop and discovered her body in one of the hotel's 4 water storage tanks. The coroner's report noted that the water in the tank was dark and decomposed, consistent with the body having been in the water for an extended period. What has been noted by independent forensic commentators, and which I want to be clear, is a matter of forensic discussion rather than established fact, is the following. The water tank in question had a hatch on its top. That hatch, according to reports from the investigation period, was found closed when the body was discovered. The coroner's report classified the manner of death as accident. The question of exactly how a person enters a rooftop water tank through a hatch, and that hatch is subsequently found in the closed position, has been a subject of significant discussion in forensic contexts. The official response has been that the tank's mechanics, including the hatch mechanism, are consistent with the possibility of the hatch having closed on its own after entry. Independent structural engineers, writing in their professional capacity, have disputed this characterization. The dispute is in the public record. It has not been resolved. The investigation is officially closed. The questions raised by forensic professionals in the public record remain open. In 2021, the Cecil Hotel was converted into a low-income residential facility operating under the name Stay on Main, following a partnership with a housing nonprofit organization. The building is still standing at 640 South Main Street in Los Angeles. This matters for a reason that goes beyond historical interest. The building changed its name. The building changed its stated purpose. The regulatory environment around its cameras did not change. And here is a detail that I think deserves to be said plainly. The residents of a low-income housing facility are statistically among the populations least likely to have the legal resources, the financial resources, or the institutional access to pursue accountability if something goes wrong. The surveillance footage retention gap at the heart of this case is, in that context, not an abstract policy problem. It is a documented structural disadvantage that falls most heavily on the people with the fewest alternatives. Elisa Lam's parents, David and Yina Lam, filed a civil lawsuit against the Cecil Hotel in 2013. Court records related to that lawsuit are part of the public record. The case was eventually settled. The terms of that settlement, like most civil settlements, in premises liability cases, are not public. Elisa Lam's family never received a public accounting of exactly what happened to their daughter in that building. They received a settlement and a coroner's report, and a 54-second gap in the footage from that night that was officially called a technical anomaly. Nothing more. But here is what we know now that we did not know before. Elisa Lam was 21 years old. She was a student. She had a blog where she wrote about books and music and her life. She was traveling. Her case became one of the most discussed internet mysteries of the last decade. Her footage has been analyzed by millions. Her name is known by people who have no connection to her in countries she never visited. What they do not have, and what this investigation has never been able to produce, is a system that is structurally designed to prevent the next family from finding themselves in the same position. That system does not yet exist. The gaps are still open. The building is still standing. Final question, and this one matters. If hotels were required to retain surveillance footage for 30 days, What do you think would actually change? Would it prevent what happened to Elisa Lam? Would it prevent the next case? Tell me in the comments. Next time you walk past a building that has changed its name, look up at the cameras. Then ask yourself what they are actually required to be recording. The answer in most of this country is nothing specific. Don't miss out on the next content. Subscribe, like, and turn on notifications.